every day I still come up against, the tension and the edginess of speaking about things, sharing things, setting new boundaries with different relationships, because now non-negotiable for me to let my grief lead. I just won't do it anymore. I won't sacrifice this need for me to be in relationship with my losses in such an honest way that it actually guides me to my aliveness, to my joy. And if I sacrifice that, it is harming me. It is hurting me. Another person's discomfort, as edgy and as irky as that is, I will be with that. I will be with that before I'm with my own self-betrayal.
Welcome to the Wildflow Podcast with me, Charlotte Puanto, certified cycle and feminine embodiment coach and shamanic womb guide. In this podcast, I'll share my wisdom and conversations with powerful change makers, thought leaders and embodied teachers to invite you to live cyclically in flow with your menstrual cycle instead of fearing it, to heal menstrual shame and normalize womb wisdom and period positivity, and to step into your sovereign magnetic power to create and embody the change you desire to see in your world. Settle in to unleash your wild flow. Grief isn't sexy, but it's a powerful presence in everyone's lives. So why don't we talk about it, welcome it, and let it work us? Grief is all around us. It's in our lived experiences of losses and woundings, and it has the potential to break us open if we have the right support and a big enough capacity to meet it and come out the other side changed. Today's conversation is a rich, evocative, poetic and powerful exploration of grief and pleasure, and why and how we need to be familiar with them both as they live in our bodies. My guest today and our grief guide is a woman that I had the absolute pleasure of being guided, held and introduced to the embodied experience of pleasure at a time I was knee-deep in motherhood and rediscovering myself as a mother of 3 back at the start of 2020. At a time I needed to come home to myself on the other side of a big personal transformation. Allow me to introduce you to Kate Leiper. As creatress of the SensuAlchemy School of Embodied Grief and Pleasure and the SensuAlchemy School Podcast, Kate completed a double degree in drama and education, a postgraduate and master's degree in counselling and psychotherapy, before she realised there was something big missing on her own path to healing. Reflected in the struggles of her women clients, Kate too felt disconnected and distrusting of her body, stuck in a loop attempting to intellectually process years of sexual trauma and boundary ruptures. A longing to feel whole and reclaim her personal power led Kate to the world of embodiment and somatics. Alongside further studies in integrative trauma modalities and certifying as a feminine embodiment coach, Kate navigated the devastating diagnosis, surgeries, and eventual death of her younger sister to brain cancer in 2019. This heartbreaking loss, plus a miscarriage and personal health crises, led Kate into developing a powerfully embodied, pleasure-oriented approach to grief and loss. Through the lens of the archetypal feminine and with an emphasis on sensual movement, ritual, and creative expression, Kate is devoted to sharing the healing gifts and leadership power of the SensuAlchemy Method to women all over the world. We wove a conversation in this episode around Kate's story of loss and grief and how this cracked her open and called her home to herself. Why we are collectively grief illiterate and unable to openly feel, express, and own our grief or hold others in their own pain and grief. How grief can be a portal through which we can grow our capacity to transmute pain of loss into pleasure. How grief can fuel our creativity and feminine styles of leadership, and why the world needs leaders who are capable of meeting grief. And how pleasure and grief can coexist within us, and how we can meet these opposing emotions and energies that live in our bodies through embodiment work. This is a powerful conversation, one that has moved me and taught me and remembered nuance relating to the experience of grief and loss and pleasure in my body, in my experience. I love listening to Kate talking about these difficult concepts and bringing them back into conversation, back into awareness, back into the domain of empowerment and healing and transformation that it deserves to live in. Enjoy this episode with me and with Kate. Welcome, beautiful Kate Leiper, to Wild Flow. How are you today?
Hello, Charlotte. Thank you so much. I'm doing well. I feel a little slow and a little kind of gooey and tender, but I'm well. Thank you.
Love that. Gooey, tender, and slow. Okay, so my next question will be for you to ask you to share your cycle check-in, and that would help us to expand a little on this gooey, slow tenderness and see where that's coming from and if that's cycle influenced. And I can share first. So for me, in my sense of my cyclic energy today, I'm in my inner autumn, and I'm lost track of which cycle day I'm on today. I'm not actually sure. But I'm about the same as the moon phase, and we are coming up to the third quarter moon in a couple of days, I think it is. So I'm at that same point in my menstrual cycle, 3/4 of the way in, and I'm feeling like, we just took some breaths before we pressed record because we've both got 3 daughters each.
Yes.
young ones as well. And it's bedtime while we're recording, and away in our houses is bedtime, perhaps chaos, perhaps just that transition, that sort of end of the day winding down. And I feel like that's how I feel in myself as well at this point in my cycle. It's that kind of winding down into the slower part of the evening after the busy day. So I feel like I really needed those breaths that we just took, and just to sigh and sigh and sigh and drop down deeper and deeper and deeper, back, calling myself back to myself. So that was really lovely. So yeah, I feel like there's some aligning energies here. We've got autumn, evening, and third week of my menstrual cycle.
Yeah, look at you.
It's all sort of, I wanted to say ganging up on me then. That was funny. That was the expression that dropped into my head. That's not right at all though, but just it's all aligning in that sense of like slowing down. And I can really feel it. Some tenderness, some tiredness, some where am I again? What's going on again? And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you. So on that note, would you like to share, if you connect to your cyclical self, maybe cycles around you, within you and around you, where you're at, what you're feeling in relation to that?
Yeah, I do. And my cycle has been kind of moving around a lot more in recent months than it had been. But I'm actually on the 3rd day of my bleed today. So I'm in the thick of it. Pardon the pun. But it's been interesting because yesterday was Easter Monday, right? So we've just come off the back of the 4-day long weekend, and it was beautiful, actually. I completely just went into holiday mode, which was really welcome. And today, it's still school holidays, but kind of back in the swing of a bit more routine today. And I had the girls headed to, grandma's house and daycare so I could do some work. It was like quite the shock to my menstruating system. It was like, oh, hold up. Yeah, exactly. What you were sharing before, it's that sense of where am I, who am I, and how do I really honor that gooey slowness that I've been in, and also, I suppose, get a few things done. I didn't have anything greatly urgent on my agenda, but feel as though I was moving forward in a gentle way, particularly coming out of this really lovely break that I had. So yeah, it's but having this conversation tonight actually feels really nourishing. It doesn't feel like, oh, another thing on the list. It's been something I've been really looking forward to because I knew I could just be where I'm at, and I think there's something so refreshing about that. There is no pretense, there is no pressure to be performing, which, yeah, so beautiful. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm so glad that you feel that way and that you can be your full gooey tender self. And I'm really grateful as well that you shared that, because I hadn't thought about where we are at in school holidays and with Easter. That just didn't come to me when I was sharing my check-in, but yet it's such a big part of how I'm feeling today, for sure. And I think that feels to me quite typical of being at this point in my cycle. It's sort of like a bit kind of all over the shop and not as grounded and connected and aware, perhaps. Hopefully that will come. But yeah, absolutely. I've had this. Today's been a work day. I had a group call that I led today, and I've had admin, and it's been like Phil, my husband, had the girls on school holidays, and today's been like a do day. And coming off the back of the long weekend and even a few days before that of not working at all, it just, it was a bit of I've got to work. Oh but it's lucky I love what I do, right? Because it's a treat to be able to sink into something that nourishes me and lights me up. And I'm sure that you feel the same way with you. I can see you nodding with your work too. So yeah, it's a lucky thing. But beautiful. Thank you for sharing that and helping me drop into mine as well.
Pleasure.
Speaking of pleasure, we are for a conversation about grief and pleasure and the incredible work that you do. And me and Kate have known each other for a few years now. So about 3 years, we just worked out it was. I joined Kate's program, her coaching program that she was running. And I had 3 children, and my youngest was a few months old as a baby. And it was a beautiful, really nourishing group coaching program, a journey into embodiment. And it was so nourishing. It was so well suited to me as a woman back in the postpartum bubble, negotiating life, and identifying as a mum of 3, which it was an identity shift.
Yeah.
I think, as you have a new child, it's like, oh, I'm a mum of however many, it's a change. So to have that space for me at that time was really powerful. And I loved that work we did together. And so that was 3 years on, and your work has evolved since then. And I'm dying to hear all about it. And I'm so glad that we're having this conversation on Wild Flow, because as we'll get into, no doubt, the topics of grief and pleasure are not your average, water cooler conversation between people and women. And I think these are really juicy topics, ripe with potential for us to connect to our wild feminine, our true selves, and a lot of power and potential in that. So I'm really looking forward to finding out what you're up to and what's brought you to this. So on your website, I saw that you share a beautiful quote caught my attention as soon as I opened it up. And I would love to ask you that question. Would you like to begin by sharing with us, how did your broken heart call you home?
I just got full body goosebumps at being asked that question. I feel like there has been many paths actually that my broken heart has guided me towards, and that has ultimately led me to a sense of greater and deeper home in my own body. And I'm still walking that path, walking the many paths. I'm certainly not, and I never, ever speak to arriving anywhere on this homeward journey. I know that when we were doing our work together, Charlotte, back in 2020, it was an enormous year for me. It was the year following my sister's death. My sister Sarah died from a brain tumor in 2019. And a lot of my story, a lot of my work in recent years has been, I suppose, born of the heartbreak of that loss, and has also catalyzed, I think, an understanding of many layers of loss that I had been carrying throughout my life that have culminated and have really revealed themselves to me through that major crisis, the major tragedy of my sister's death. And so I would absolutely attribute her death to cracking me wide open in ways that I have just, I can't begin to even put language to. And that year, 2020, I also was right at the beginning of 2019. I fell pregnant again, surprisingly, with my gorgeous third daughter. And so 2020 was also this it was just madness. I was reconciling this pregnancy, which was a complete surprise. And also now, and I think I began to really understand it as the pregnancy progressed, an incredible healing blessing as well. And so as I have too navigated this identity of mother of three girls, particularly, there has been so much heartbreak that has surfaced in really facing so many losses, I think, as I kind of, mentioned before, that being a woman and seeing the world through the eyes of a woman and the many woundings that I've acquired just because I am a woman in this world, as many of us are, that has been huge for me as I've been looking in the little eyes, of these three little women. And so all of these heartbreaks are like threads, are just kind of weaving themselves now. In my life, as I've just turned 40, it's kind of like, right, okay, I've lived a considerable life with hopefully a lot more, but here we are, and grief has played a really phenomenal role in shaping the woman that I am. And and heartbreak has really been at the core.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kate. I really respect your capacity to speak to the losses and the heartache and the tragedy that you've experienced, because what I can really sense from you in that and what you've shared is that has you said cracked you open, and I know that feeling so well, but also that is what has catalyzed this path for you, and you're here to share what you have journeyed through in a way that can be helpful and healing to others as well. And that's such a gift to receive for others, because we are not comfortable talking about grief. It's not sexy. It's not welcomed. It's taboo. It's awkward. It makes people very uncomfortable. We're kind of illiterate in grief, in the language of grief, and in the rites of grief as well. And I wondered if you've got any thoughts on why that is, especially when I believe, as you know, watching women around me and what I have felt in my own experiences, you know, we feel so much. We have this great capacity to feel, but when we're not allowed to feel the full spectrum of what we feel, we're doing such a disservice to ourselves and to each other in these experiences. What's that coming from, do you think?
There is so much to that question. And I love that you used the term, we are illiterate in terms of, you know, our grief, because that is exactly what I teach, is this embodied grief literacy. How can we understand the language of our own grief personally and also the grief of the collective, so we can be in community with one another and we can invite the rites. You know, we can invite ritual and ceremony back in really meaningful ways to move through our grief. And a huge barrier to that is the fact that we live in a society, we live in a culture, particularly in the Western world, in which grief is pathologized for the most part. And I find that deeply frustrating because, and I think often a lot of the time when we don't understand a human response, it's very easy, or we don't feel as though we can control a human response because it's chaotic and unruly and unpredictable. We like to box it in. We like to put a label on it. We like to make it a little easier to digest. And so we pathologize it. We put limitations on it. We kind of try to rein it in. And grief is not something that we are actually ever able to control, to make predictable, to rein in. And it is also not a deficit of being human. It is also, for the most part, not a problem. And we are just wildly uncomfortable by anything that, that we can't make sense of or make behave. And so that's one aspect. Also, I'm really fascinated by the connection between the way that we relate to all things feminine and grief. And so I know that we've been speaking to a woman's experience so far, but when I'm speaking to the feminine here, I'm really speaking to those qualities and energies that we attribute to the feminine, and emotionality, sensitivity, expression, softness, those kind of qualities. Our culture likes to, you know, pop under the label of feminine, and unfortunately have also been seen to be less than, to be weak, to be something that needs to harden up, to be something that needs to have meaning made really quickly and really succinctly, please, because then we can do something with it. And the feminine, you know, grief is something that, because emotionality and sensitivity and the chaos of what it is to feel utter pain, to feel shattered and cracked open, is very much the same, I think, as so many things that we attribute to the feminine. Really fascinates me how we relegate that, to something that needs to be fixed, that's something that is weak, that is a problem. And so I've been really kind of curious and playing in my work in the body, what happens when we actually resensitize and welcome these feminine aspects, the feminine energy that we have also kind of suppressed and repressed. When we welcome that, the grief that is actually so vivid and so present, alongside that, often will surface. And so then we can actually begin to relate to our grief in this, in this understanding that it is just as precious and just as vital as everything else that we've been taught we must aspire to. It is just so valuable in our human experience and really a gateway to feeling alive, just as it is to be reunited to all of our feminine selves and all the wounding that has been afflicted, for generations and generations. So it's a really long answer for you, and there's so many threads in that. Obviously, I could go in so many different ways, but that's really just what's kind of feeling top of heart tonight.
Wow, what a stunning answer. And as you spoke, I thought, oh, yes, you've illuminated threads that I had maybe forgotten or desensitized to, or hadn't been at the forefront of my awareness. And oh yeah, it just feels so, the pain of as not being able to express our grief as well. It's great, isn't it? It's so intense. And when we hold on to it and we stuff it down, then it can make us sick. It's much healthier to build a capacity to feel it and relate to it. I'm curious, when you are speaking, I was just aware of how much overlap there is with attitudes towards menstruation, the menstrual cycle, the body. It's so interconnected. It's all so part of the same thing. And for so many people, grief can really come up at different phases of the menstrual cycle, all different points, depending on someone's own experience. And like with those emotions that can come up then, which may very well include grief, when we're not able to share our fullness, and we have to hold ourselves back and make ourselves presentable and make other people comfortable and hide our blood, our bodies, our grief. When we can learn to relate to our own grief, can we then feel safe in doing that in a world, even if we're comfortable with that, when others around us are not?
What a great question, and really the question. And I would say that it's the kind of question that really does need to be confronted as a matter of such importance, because we are so used, particularly as women, we are so used to making ourselves small and quiet, because it simply does make people uncomfortable when women are fully expressed, when we are in our bigness, when we are just simply not willing to contort ourselves anymore. That is really uncomfortable and incredibly challenging to the powers that be under patriarchy. And so when we commit to coming into a new relationship with our grief, because that's what this work is ultimately about, it is never about healing grief, because there's no such thing. And I really feel like that's something that needs to be made explicit. This work, particularly in relation to embodiment, when we come into the body and we meet our grief in a really honest, intimate ways, we learn very quickly that this is not a part of us that will ever be fixed or healed. We will never just wipe our hands of our grief. Whilst our heart is beating, we will be in relationship to our grief in some way, shape, or form. So when we understand that and we begin to move towards our grief and build capacity, that beautiful word that you shared before, we slowly, bit by bit, begin to open ourselves, our hearts, our nervous systems, all of us, to the language of our grief, the textures, the layers of our grief. That too is widening our capacity, not just to be with it, but to express it, to create from it, to connect with it, using our grief as a bridge to others, to community. And so gradually, I think it is directly linked. We begin to feel more comfortable with our discomfort, and that shifts things. That shifts our willingness to contort. That shifts our good girl, obliging natures. It begins to really shake things up in a way that pushes boundaries. And so where it's certainly not easy, and I have to say every day I still come up against the tension and the edginess of speaking about things, sharing things, setting new boundaries with different relationships, because it is now non-negotiable for me to let my grief lead. I just won't do it anymore. I won't sacrifice this need for me to be in relationship with my losses in such an honest way that it actually guides me to my aliveness, to my joy. And if I sacrifice that, it is harming me. It is hurting me. And so another person's discomfort, as edgy and as irky as that is, I will be with that. I will be with that before I'm with my own self-betrayal.
Mm.
And that is massive. And that has been my experience. And that has been the experience of other women I work with. And I witness that when they are widening their capacity and they are beginning to speak from their grief and towards their aliveness. Things just change, priorities change. But it's gentle, slow work. It's powerful work, but it's gentle, slow work.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. What an incredible piece of work that you're, a real gift that you're inviting people to own and to feel and to share and to express and to not. I like what you said there about not betraying yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really feel that. That's huge, because that's what it is, isn't it? When we meet other people's, you should be over that by now. Why are you worrying about that? You've got XYZ good things in your life, or
Right.
whatever it is. The commitment and the devotion to your truth and how you feel, and standing in that and honoring that, and not putting that flame out. I can imagine is this essential work. And what you said about it doesn't, you never heal it. It's always there, but you can by coming into that relationship with it. It takes on, is this right? Is this mine? Is this what you're saying? It takes on a new form. It takes on a new, like it transmutes.
Mm-hmm.
You can use that energy into another form that has a different quality to it, a different purpose maybe, or is that?
Yeah, it is. It truly is. And I think it's important to say, and I'm gathering um that you're feeling me in this, is that it is not about holding on to feeling shitty. It is not about I am holding on to my grief and my sadness forevermore. It will not be healed, and it's this kind of some righteous act of, you know, I love that you have really picked up on this idea of transmutation, because ultimately, yes, I speak a lot to embodied grief alchemy and this grief and pleasure paradox that can live within us. And the interesting thing is that when we begin to relate to our grief as a wise teacher, we are we're listening better. We are learning the language, and we are allowing it to guide us in ways that we otherwise wouldn't have known, wouldn't have trusted necessarily. And so the alchemy is in this capacity building, is in trusting that these complicated, nuanced feelings and sensations and these layers that have emerged in this grief, whatever is the catalyst, it has something to teach me and to show me. And so, in my experience, this has been ultimately what is aliveness to me? What is it that my body needs to feel whole, to feel sensual, to feel in contact with the earth and with other human beings and all beings, to really know what it is to be alive? And so there is a lot of pleasure in that. And this is the kind of pleasure, again, that patriarchy really doesn't want you to know about, because when we are in contact with this kind of aliveness, and our grief has been like the portal there, I mean, we just can't, that can't be stopped. That's like a runaway train, and it is just so that is lineage healing work. That is when I see my daughters witnessing me being so honest and available to my grief and letting it kind of take me, and then them witnessing me use that and through my practices, through creativity, through connecting, through my work, through all of these different ways, and they actually see me in the vibrancy of and the presence of pleasure and of all of these other special things that we get to do together. That makes me proud. That's like, oh, wow, I'm showing them something that I never saw. And I don't have this down. There's no perfection here, but it's a knowing in my body that there's some cycle changing and some pattern interrupting here. And it is. I never anticipated that pleasure would be such a fundamental part of my grief work, but here we are. Yeah.
That's incredible. I've been really wanting to ask you what the relationship to grief and pleasure is, and how you access that pleasure through your grief, and how one can be found in the other and cultivated. I think what you just shared there is such an incredible answer, and a really visceral experience of how that grief wells up in you. And then through that, you said about what do you need? What does it feel like to be alive? Wow. Yeah. To find that in those moments of despair and pain, to find what it is that would help you to feel alive, and to let that build up in you and spill into pleasure is I just, wow. Yeah, like you say, if we had more teachings on this, if we had role models on this, if we hadn't, if we could pass on to our children and to others these ways of acknowledging grief, and it's, everyone's experienced grief in different ways, and instead of this something that we think of maybe as just end of life, but also can be things that we live with all the time. Like you say, this lineage breaking power that it has to face it, to meet it, and to journey with it. It's incredible. And one of the things that I know that you do is you offer leadership work. And I'm really curious about how grief and pleasure has a role to play in creativity and leadership.
Yes. Thank you for asking that. This is something that it's like this beautiful marriage. It's this really interesting intersection that has just seemingly organically come together. And so what I've noticed, and what I definitely noticed in my own experience, but that seems to be really common, is so it's kind of chicken or the egg, right? So either a woman recognizes already that she is creative, there is leadership qualities in her that perhaps, she's always possessed, and yet there's been an experience in her life, some kind of loss that has really shaken her foundations and really just kind of challenged everything she knew about the world. So quite an existential crisis has happened. And so there's this really powerful invitation, or I like to really offer this powerful invitation to come towards that and to meet that in the body. And what happens in that meeting is a whole new world of possibility arises, because when we can be with our grief and understand it as just as important as our joy, it is still vitality, right? So when we're thinking about what it is to be a vital human, healthy, well, vibrant, exuberant, grief has to be there. It's the other side of the coin, to love, to light. It is the human experience. So when a woman can meet that within her and kind of work through, as I shared before, the alchemy of that, creativity just blossoms. And so leadership then is really born of this true lived genuine experience of going down into the dark sludge and really not then kind of coming out this shiny, glistening, perfect leader, but this leader of substance and rawness and expression that resonates, right? So there's that I've witnessed. And these are women that I work with. And I call it is creative feminine leadership. And then there's also the woman who perhaps didn't ever identify herself as a leader traditionally, right? This mainstream girl boss CEO kind of type. It's like, no, that's definitely not me. And yet something happens. She loses a loved one. She experiences the breakdown of a marriage or a significant partnership. She has a chronic health challenge. Something happens that has her again question all of life, who she is, all her relationships, and the willingness to be with the immense loss, the immense grief of that. actually teaches her what a leader truly is. And it is, again, that is, I just bow to these women who I have the privilege of working with, who actually meet themselves as a leader in the process of this alchemy work, in the process of coming home to her body in an entirely new, beautiful, powerful way that acknowledges and fully honors the depths of her broken heart. And so it's really fascinated me, actually, and I'm so deeply passionate about supporting women leaders in this work because our world needs it desperately. Our world is craving women leaders, but feminine leadership in all shapes and forms, leadership that prizes equally the energy and the qualities of the feminine, and that and grief is an enormous part of that, because we need some serious humanity, and we need to do some pretty drastic work and make some pretty incredible change. And I really believe that creative feminine leadership, off the back of this grief and aliveness work, is a big piece of the puzzle. So I'm kind of journeying with that.
That's fascinating. I think it's incredible because what you just said there, I really agree. I think that the state of the world that we're in with, on the global scale, in communities and health and the economy and just all of the things, everything is in such a crumbling, sick state. And to be able to stand in that and not gaslight everyone, it's fine,
Right.
it's fine, we're just gonna smooth this over and it's all fine. It's like, actually, can we sit in that and, like you said, make those big decisions and tell those difficult truths and be solid and anchored and resourced and capable of rising. It's like we're in this collective underworld experience, as whatever we're living in is it's coming to some kind of head at some point.
It really
sure.
is. Yeah,
so,
it really is.
We're really in this place of death and destruction and sickness, and from that we have to rise. You talk about the collective grief, not just the our individual experiences. I wonder if we can harness those to collectively help this planet to alchemize the state that we're in and come together. And we need embodied leaders who are capable of feeling and not being stuck in their ego and power grab. And I really feel, when you have described this grief work, that just how important it is to reclaim this very valid place that it needs to have in our conversations and in our culture. It's big work.
It is. Big brave work for sure. Yeah. I love also, I just want to pick up on this, the word resource that you use, because that is the pleasure component. We can't actually have the relationship to our grief that we need unless we are resourced by all of the things that support us to feel good, that support us to see the beauty, feel the beauty of the world as well. And that is just as, if not even a teeny bit more important, right? Because that is what keeps this work sustainable, is the resourcing piece. And so I'm not speaking about just having a lovely bubble bath every now and then. I mean, of course, these things are beautiful, when I speak to pleasure work, this is, again, completely reconfiguring our idea of what pleasure is. It is taking pleasure away from the male gaze, from capitalism, from all of these kind of things that we have tangled, particularly feminine pleasure, up with, right? We don't need lace and red lippy and all of these things. Yes, I happen to like those things as well. And pleasure that comes from the inside out and a sense of aliveness is something that is a practice. It is about deeply cultivating a relationship to self. And so my relationship to pleasure and aliveness in my body is going to feel different to yours, Charlotte, and different to everybody else's. There might be commonalities and this beautiful ripple that happens. But ultimately, I need to find the ways that resource me so I can stay honest and true to my grief. And that resourcing piece, I just think, really needs to be highlighted. And so these are things that we need to be taught and practice. And, we don't just wake up one day going, yay, I can, look at me. I've broken down all of these walls. It is, it's work we can't do in isolation. And it is about understanding our bodies, our culture, all of these different ways in which both our grief and our pleasure have been stigmatized and taboo and exiled. So, both so important.
Thanks for sharing that and speaking to that. I think it's a really important part of the conversation, like you say, like reclaiming grief and reclaiming pleasure, and then trusting what it means to us and what feels good to us and what we, like you said, what we need to come to aliveness. And I'm curious if you've got any guidance for anyone who's listening who's like, oh, I've been wading through grief, or I'm curious of learning about this. What I feel you're speaking to with pleasure as well. It's so much stronger and deeper and powerful. Like you say, it's not that flimsy surface level cliche. This is really deep work. If somebody's thinking of they're either learning or wanting to learn and be really deep in integrity around these topics, what maybe are some practices or first steps that people could tiptoe towards?
Yeah, definitely. And let's emphasize that it is also about a readiness. I really work with women at this point. There's a very specific point, and it's a felt experience. So you might be listening and just be like, whoa, that sounds so far away. Or that sounds nice. Oh, good on her. And that's totally okay and perfect. And usually the woman who feels that little niggle, or there's that whisper of, there's something in this for me, perhaps there has been a significant loss or change or transition that has happened. And maybe it is recently, maybe it is some time ago, but it is lingering. And that it has a bearing on you and the way that you show up in the world. And it's different. We could talk about this all day, but it's different to perhaps trauma in that, grief has a different texture to it. And there's a sense of readiness and a curiosity. There's a curiosity as to what might it be like to let this in a little more, or to sense, to really come into exploring through my senses and widening this fear of this sphere of what you've been living in, right? It's like maybe you're just aware, okay, my pattern of every night on the couch eating half a block of chocky and watching Netflix has been really comforting and beautiful for a long time. And I'm ready. There's something here for me. Or my working, and just on this treadmill of productivity has been really great in keeping me just feeling like I've got purpose and I'm ready to feel something a little different. There's a readiness, and only you can identify that. So firstly, I think it's just in acknowledging a readiness to feel something different, to befriend grief, or to just even take a step back and look at it a little differently, to just acknowledge, how do I feel about grief and pleasure? And is there something curious that I can begin to explore? And I think that if you know. The first thing I'd love to invite anyone who feels this sense of readiness to experience. It's a really simple, it's on my website actually. It's a 20-minute audio experience. It's called Beheld and Behold. And I created it to allow people to experience a sense of being able to hold both the textures and qualities of grief. And I don't necessarily speak to that explicitly, but just kind of a heaviness or a tightness or a sadness or whatever that might be, however your language is communicating with you, and hold that alongside this really gentle exploration into okayness, goodness, warmth, a little spark of aliveness. And so I really just invite you on this journey to just locate these two coexisting states within you at once. And it's actually really gentle and loving. And I've had people comment that it's just like, oh my God, it is part of their practice, an opportunity to just melt into themselves and to remember that they're more than just kind of one emotion or one thing. So Beheld and Behold is, just a nice little practice, guided practice that you can access. And from that place, I feel like it is just in the noticing of those qualities that arise and really using that to perhaps just inspire some kind of expression, whether that is if you like to dance or move or paint or write. And just, curiosity is my favorite lens, and just really beginning to flesh some of these ways in which we might be moving through the world, particularly in grief or loss, and just begin to flesh them out through expression. And this doesn't need to be shared with anyone. This can be deeply personal. But I think sometimes when we just lift the lid, we begin to untangle these things, a path begins to unfold. And just really trusting that. So if you're ready, I just wish you all the love in the world to just be, to just take the plunge and get curious.
It just sounds like such a gorgeous, soft and gentle hug.
Good.
And a really beautiful, tender way to meet those two different energies and qualities that might be alive in us, and this complexity that we can have as humans, where we can feel these opposing emotions and qualities, and we can learn to hold both of those at once. I think that sounds gorgeous. And I know from experience that you do incredible embodiment work. And I love listening to your voice. It's just, it's been such a beautiful, beautiful guide for me, especially at the time when I really needed it a few years ago. And so I really recommend, if anyone's listening who's feeling drawn, to go and check out Kate's work. So do you want to just share a bit more about what you've got on offer and where people can connect with you?
Firstly, thank you, Charlotte. That means so much. And I'm just so grateful that our paths crossed those years ago. And Yes, I still actually have the program that um, you were involved in has taken on a few different iterations, and I will be offering Luminous again later this year. But prior to that, I will be running a shorter program. It's about 4 or 5 weeks, and it's called Grief Weavers, and that will be dropping again. I think I'm looking at June. And it is really a space in which to meet you if you are feeling that sense of readiness. It is a program that is ultimately about learning the language of your grief, but through the lenses that I've spoken to a little bit today. So understanding the culture around grief and why it is that we do have these challenges, understanding our own body in grief, how we can support and resource ourselves. There's lots of processes and lots of untangling from the feminine web of grief that I spoke a little bit about, and weaving our own grief experiences, our own stories into this really beautiful tapestry of creativity, of expression. And so that is, a powerful place, I think, to start and to also just come together with others. So I'll be offering that again really soon. And so I'll share some more details with you, Charlotte. And I'm looking forward to that.
That sounds really special, and I love the name Grief Weavers. I just have this vision of, sharing stories and practices and being heard. The importance that we have, it's important to be heard in that our wholeness, but I feel like especially in our grief. So I wish you all the very best with your work. So I'll pop the links to where people can connect with you. There's your website, kateleiper.com, and perfect. Your Instagram as well at kate.leiper. So I'll pop that there so people can come find you and download your beautiful guided process as well. Thank you so much for an incredible conversation. I've loved this so much. I've felt like in many ways I've learned so much, and I've felt like you've helped me contact a lot of nuance around grief as well. And I'm remembering that grief is something that can really open a new door for us, a new pathway, and that can be something that is devastatingly difficult, but also magically profound, perhaps as well. Thank you for coming on and sharing with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Charlotte. It has just been so delicious and a real privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening in. If you're loving this podcast and you'd love to help me spread the wisdom shared, please leave a review or rating, or share this with somebody who you think would love to listen in. I'm really passionate about creating ripples of change and getting this information to more women, girls, and people with a cycle so that they can reclaim their cyclic natures too. And if you'd love to dive in deeper with learning more about how to connect with your cycle and rites of passages, come and join our free Wild Flow Circle community, or choose a course and learn with me on my online learning hub. All the links are in the show notes. And until next time, be well and go with the flow of your cyclic nature.